It has been a long day, and I'm sure all of you are wanting to take a break and enjoy the sunset outside. So we'll try and make this as painless as possible. Physics, there's a lot of physics involved, and I'm not going to try and be a physicist. Are there any physicists in the room who can probably do a better job? Okay, then it's going to be, I'll try to make this as simple as possible, but let's see. And then yung point. Okay, so my topic is on electromagnetic fields. And what does electromagnetic fields and cells have to do with each other? We are basically in an environment, it's an open system environment, and there are effects of electromagnetic field and electrical field into our system. For the whole day, practically, we've talked about biochemistry, the reactions of such to cells and what have you. Dr. Lambert had mentioned a little bit of physics, but very tiny. And we also had a talk on the IV laser therapy, a little bit of physics as well. But basically, let's just go through a few terms so we can understand this afternoon's lecture, that there are electromagnetic fields that's being produced outside and inside the body. And these are because there are electric current. There are electric current or electric charges. And Faraday's law, if we go back to physics, it's the movements of the charges that will produce your electromagnetic waves or electromagnetic fields. And there are different kinds of electromagnetic fields depending on the frequency. The ones that we are familiar with are your electricity. You're familiar with your phones, your home appliance. Those are gadgets using electromagnetic fields as well. Electricity in some countries is 50 hertz. In other countries, it's 60 hertz. So in the Philippines, we have 50 to 60. Why do we have 50 to 60? We have fluctuating electric current. That's why in the Philippines, we try and invest also in what we call auto voltage regulators, so that our machines, our $1 million, million peso machines in the clinic will not break. We want to regulate the power. Now, those are human-made electric currents. There are those that are godly made. If we believe in God, whoever we believe in, what's in our body, those are electric currents and electromagnetic fields within the body that we did not create, but it's there. And we can see now how there is influence and how we can actually influence those cells, tissues, and we can try and push creations of these cells. That's why we're calling it electromagnetic fields in cells, particularly in stem cells. And I will only go through a few stem cells because those have been studied thoroughly, and some are still being studied, especially in the line of neurology, but mostly the ones that I'll be mentioning are the ones with clinical studies. Okay, so I mentioned that electromagnetic waves are being carried around by particles. And you have two kinds. You have the non-ionizing and the ionizing. To differentiate those, non-ionizing are weak fields. Okay, quanta is a unit of an electromagnetic field. So if you see the word quanta, we're just talking about the unit of electromagnetic field. They are too weak for non-ionizing, too weak to break any bonds. Okay? However, ionizings are the ones that can break bonds. An example of that is your X-ray. Okay? That's why when we go in and have ourselves X-rayed, if someone is pregnant, we are cautioned to stay away from the room. Okay? Speaking of that, I'd like to now go and differentiate magnetic field with electric field, because the importance of this you will see in our daily practice, okay, or in our daily lives. Electric fields are charges, and when there are difference in the charges, you will have electric field. The strength or the unit, it's being measured as volts over meter, okay? And the presence of the electric field is there, even if the gadget is turned off. An example of that is if you look at your sockets, the electrical socket, you know that there is an electrical field in there. That's why we cover it if we have babies at home. Because if they try and put something in there, especially metal, they'll get electrocuted, okay? These are reduced by walls or coverings, such that if you have your electrical wires or currents, if they are placed underneath the soil or the ground or within the walls, you can actually reduce that. However, with magnetic field, that is still present, even if the magnetic field is switched off. That's why if you go in for X-rays, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you stepped outside the wall of the X-ray room that you are actually protected from the X-ray. It can get through the walls, okay? Now, electromagnetic fields are measured by frequencies, and there are three types. You have the extremely low frequency field, the intermediate field, and the radio frequency. This is your scale, okay? The scale will tell you whether it's an extremely low field, an intermediate, or radio frequency, okay? This is the low field. 50 hertz is a low field. That is your national electrical grid line, what we are being exposed to. That's why in our daily lives, you see electrical poles, and we're not scared to be near it because it's supposed to be safe, okay? However, I think there was a movie in the United States, I forgot the name of that woman that lived in an area being exposed to higher electrical field and magnetic field, and she won the case, and some $1 million was given to her. I forgot the movie. But anyway, there have been studies now, of course, saying that our exposure to these electromagnetic fields and electrical fields may be dangerous. But we won't dwell on that this afternoon because that's not my topic, okay? What my topic is, it's the low frequency electromagnetic fields on cells, okay? Especially on progenitor cells, on the human bone marrow stem cells, myoid cells, human adipocytes, and for oogenesis and spermatogenesis. Okay, as an exogenous stimuli, there is promotion of differentiation of skeletal cells. And, okay, let me just move this. Okay, so there's And this is done via the ion dynamics and small signaling molecules, enhancing adherence, proliferation, and viability. Enhancement of osteogenesis and chondrogenesis, and plasma membrane is the main target of EMF because it can cause ion influx, and also for the ligand binding through the receptor site, modulating signal cascade. Now, human bone marrow stromal cells possess characteristic calcium waves that are involved in intracellular signaling. These waves operate in short and long periods, with the longer periods operating during the transcellular signaling. This calcium has oscillations and are very much involved in the dynamic transport to and from the cells. The cytosols, exchanges between the cells, play a key role in an induced differentiation. There was a study that by putting in a current of 0.1 volts per centimeter, 30 minutes a day for 10 days, they saw the expression of osteogenic factors for the human bone marrow stromal cells differentiation into osteogenic cell lineage by reducing the calcium frequency and oscillations. Now, mechanical forces have been known to affect molecular signaling and molecules in bone via mechanotransduction. Now, think of it this way. If I start running here, and if I ask you guys to start running and making vibrations and movements, basically those are your mechanotransduction. How do we apply this as we were, or in sports, or for those that are younger people? In the teenage years, I remembered I was told not to lift weights or not to do so much workout in the gym because it'll stunt my growth. On the contrary, newer studies now, based on this, is that you go and engage into sports, especially when the growth plates have not fused. Why? Because with this, with the mechanotransduction, the conversion of mechanical loads to bioelectric signals in the bone has suggested that it controls the repair and remodeling. These signals are attributed to electrically generated kinetic behavior where mechanical forces generate electrical signals due to the motion of ion carrying extracellular fluid in the bone matrix. This is quote-unquote called the streaming potentials, meaning that by vibrations, and we've also heard about vibrations causing better wound healing. It's the same principle, that we are actually producing cells. We're pushing for differentiations for tissue repair via vibrations, mechanotransduction, because they are actually pushing for the expressions of genes so that bone matrix and bones can be made. They've done the experiments using 5 to 75 hertz to differentiate these bone cells. Physiologic frequency, however, happens between 8 to 30 hertz. So the big gap of 5 to 75, we've pretty much covered that 8 to 30 that actually does it physiologically. So we are now inducing the production of osteoblast. Now, bone remodeling is a highly integrated process of resorption of osteoclast and formation of bone tissue by osteoblast. That we learn in medical school, correct? That if you have to have a balance of osteoclast and osteoblast for bone repair. Otherwise, if we only have osteoblast, what will happen? Our bones will keep on growing and growing and growing, and it's just going to be so rigid. Where do we get our bone marrow cells? So those are going to be very, very thick apparatus inside our body. Now, These results, this is the osteoclast and osteoblast is very important. It has to be balanced. But in instances when we have injuries, this is something that this electromagnetic field can come into now. Because what we need to do is to induce osteoblast, and we put in 16 hertz of electromagnetic fields so that we can try and push for osteogenesis. We'll try and stimulate more osteoblast to happen. Pulsed EMF at 15 hertz, which was done by Dr. Sun, increases alkaline phosphatase activity, enhancing mineralization of osteogenesis, and the increase in expression of key osteogenic regulatory gene proteins, such as your RUNX2 and CBFA1. The same similar study was done. What they did was to put in 7.5 hertz for 28 days, and they saw that there are greater numbers of cells being produced. Okay. This is a lot of studies. I only picked a few from this, and that's what I shared with you. But just so you know, there are really a lot of studies on this. Okay, frequencies used are varied from 7.5 to 75 hertz, and have revealed that not only frequency but also direction of the electromagnetic field that makes a difference in the results. Human bone marrow stromal cells exposed to positive 30 hertz frequency and a negative 7.5 hertz, there is a differentiation and an increase in alkaline phosphatase as well as mRNA expression. The articular cartilages, this is now very important also. It's not only for the bone, but also for the joints. The articular cartilage repair is challenging due to the lack of abundant source of cells in the joints, and we know that. And in vitro, as a matter of fact, human bone marrow stromal cells exhibit replicative senescence, which blocks their ability to differentiate. However, in vivo, there is, with exposure to pulse EMF, there is proliferation of endogenous chondroblasts. And there is also suppression of the inflammatory reactions to induce repair treatment, thereby cartilage regeneration. Now, human bone marrow stromal cell cultures exposed to extremely low frequency magnetic fields have also yielded and promoted production of collagen 2. And we know how important collagen 2 is to our joints. And these would lead us to the importance of this mechanism to osteoarthritis. Okay, in osteoarthritis, EMF counteracts the interleukin-1 beta-induced inhibition of chondrogenesis, suggesting that EMF, or electromagnetic field, has a therapeutic strategy to improve clinical outcome in cartilage engineering and repair procedures. EMF stimulates anabolic process in synovial fluid cells in osteoarthritic cartilage and limits your interleukin-1 beta catabolic effects. Now those are for the joints. Let's go for the cells, for the muscle cells. In muscle cells, there's a calcium influx. And induction of these genes, there are quite a few genes coding for voltage-regulated channels, contributes to increase in intracytoplasmic calcium concentration. Now we know when there is an increase in in the intracellular calcium via plasmic membrane on sarcoplasmic reticulum, there is also induction or expressions of the myogenesis genes involved in differentiation. So not only do we get bones, cartilage, but we also get differentiations of muscle cells. For those three, I think regenerative medicine, especially those that does stem cell, autologous stem cells, they are actually looking into exposing the patients first to electromagnetic fields before doing the harvest, before doing the bone marrow harvest. Because these studies have mentioned that there's actually an increase in stem cells prior to or after exposure to the electromagnetic fields before extraction of bone marrow. Okay. Now, ion influx or calcium influx through the voltage required channels contributes, like what I mentioned earlier, increases the calcium concentration. We know what happens then. We know that that causes muscle contraction, but the induction of that also increases the activity of lipase. And what does lipase do? It stimulates intramuscular hydrolysis of triglyceride. So now, in addition to that, we can now try and burn fats. Okay, this is now our pathway to burn fat. And at the same time, there is also induction of PCLO, a gene that triggers secretion of insulin. So if we put in together biochemical pathway and physiological using electromagnetic fields together, we might actually see some promising results for not only lessening fats, but also getting insulin produced better. So on adipose cells, lipase, translocation of it to cytosol, it produces or expresses the CAV1 gene, and this now plays a role in adipogenesis. Transfer of cholesterol to cytoplasmic membrane activates another gene that leads to increased intestinal absorption of cholesterol. So now you also have something that works for the depletion of cholesterol that is being sensed by another gene responding to exercise and statin medications. So what then? If we are now putting ourselves into some magnetic suit, we can probably help get rid also of our statin medication. Okay, so this is a CT scan of someone that was exposed to 50 hertz of electromagnetic suit, and the exposure is 30 minutes, 3 times a week within 1 month. And within 1 month, this is the result. You have a reduction of 8.2 of visceral fat, 4.1 of subcutaneous fat, and the liver enzymes also went down. Okay. Now, electromagnetic fields on ovogenesis and spermatogenesis. This is with the influx of calcium in the plasma membrane. There is an induction of genes. You have the LHB, PROP1, CYP1, B1, causing positive fertility and induces the expression of luteinizing hormone beta polypeptide, a subunit of luteinizing hormone that stimulates ovulation and induces the synthesis of 11-ketosterone, activating oogenesis and spermatogenesis. So there's your calcium going in. There's now an increased expression of these genes that would cause your ovulation, as well as the production of 11-ketosterone to help in spermatogenesis and ovogenesis. Okay, I've said so much about electromagnetic waves and fields. How do we do this? There are suits that you can put yourselves into. There are wraps that you can wrap on your abdominal area and around the thighs. Okay, so those are your low electromagnetic wavelengths. Those are just samples. There are also other stuff now that goes around. Sometimes they're like multi-level marketing strategies on other beds with electromagnetic wavelengths, different wavelengths, just so if you get to come across, ask them, so what's the frequency? So then you'll have an idea already what it can be used for. Let's now go to what other electromagnetic wavelengths that's available out there, which is radio frequency energy. Now we're towards the higher frequencies. And you know, and many are already have been introduced to radio frequencies because they are used in medical fields. Some are being used for, I think, cutting tumors inside the body. It's also being used as in bronchoscopy. These are examples of appliances with their radio frequencies. But I'm not sure how many dermatologists in the field, how many are those that are practicing aesthetic medicine. But here is an example of another example of a machine that's out there. I'm not sponsored by this machine, just so we can test this one. I tried and studied their machine and sampled it myself. So this is monopolar radio frequency. Here is a basic diagram of what they have out there. It's called Thermage. And let me go through that very quickly. What is Thermage? It's a monopolar, capacitively coupled radio frequency system that utilizes a reverse thermal gradient to non-invasively smooth, tighten, and contour the skin, as well as reduce the appearance of cellulite in a single treatment. Okay. As a dermatologist, we do have to study these equipments. Otherwise, you will end up buying numbers and numbers of them, and we will not have enough money to pay for rent. Okay, they're very expensive. They're in the million. Okay, and what is it? Again, it's a radio frequency emitting 6.78 megahertz. So we are around the radio, the AM, FM radio frequency. Okay, what happens here is that there is an alternating current at a high frequency that would heat the tissue in order to produce tightening and contouring effects. The treatment tip electrode, which is attached on a handpiece, and the RF generator creates an electric field deep within the tissue, which changes polarity. The polarized electrons and negatively charged ions that are part of the tissue structure within the electric field are attracted and repelled at the same frequency. With that, it causes oscillations, vibrations, and heating the tissue. Okay. So there is reverse polarization in the previous slide. These oscillating charges are what we mean when we describe the frequency of an RF. Okay. And I've mentioned earlier what happens when there is movements of charges inside. Movement of charges would mean electric field. And since it's moving at a very fast rate, it's producing a high frequency. High frequency then heats up the skin. Now, if you think about your microwaves, the mode of action of the microwave is to heat up the tissue and the water, the molecules inside the food very, 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 very fast so that it heats up the food that we're about to eat. So that's basically what's being done. But of course, this is not at the frequency of a microwave. Otherwise, we will burn the skin and the tissue inside. Okay? Now, this is Ohm's law. I don't think we want to really look at the Ohm's law and try to study it, but basically, it is what this is about. The physics behind Thermage is using the Ohm's law. And what is it? It is basically the heat generated is based on the natural resistance on the movement of the electrons within the radio frequency field. Okay? The Ohm's law is the one that's the most fundamental electrical equation within the electrical community, and it is defined by gravity. The equation of Ohm's law is shown here. Energy is equal to the current squared times the impedance times the time the current is applied. Basically, impedance to the movement of electron creates energy in the form of heat relative to the amount of current and time. Okay. Monopolar radio frequency is what is being used by Thermage, not bipolar, but monopolar. Okay? And monopolar device is one with an active electrode and a passive return electrode. The current runs from the active electrode through the body and is returned at the pad collection, or the ground that is placed on your body. The Thermage system uses this type of radio frequency. Bipolar, on the other hand, returns the current, it flows back and forth between electrodes. That's why it's kind of superficial if we use the bipolar versus that for the monopolar. And notice how it goes down. It doesn't go down on all of the tissues, but only on this particular one, and I'll go through that in a little bit. Okay. It's called selective heating, and it selects just the fibrocepta to heat. Okay. The fibrocepta are the path of the least resistance through the fat layer. So around the area earlier, you have the fat layer, and those bridges are just your fibrocepta. Okay, let's discuss this one. See how it would just go through that fibrocepta. This is a chunk of a pork skin, okay? And you have the fat layers and the fibrocepta. The heated area are only the fibrocepta. You know, when you try and cook meat, you would notice that when you heat it up, the meat will not be at the same shape prior to heating it. It would kind of wrinkle. And it wrinkles, or it will get smaller because of the pulling of the septa when you cook it. Okay, that's why we never could get the same nice chunk of, let's say, steak. If you cook steak, you will see it wrinkle a bit. And that's exactly what's happening here. We're using radio frequency to heat up only the fibrocepta. Okay? Then what's the application for the radio frequency? This high, it's for the fibrocepta. So now we also want, if we also want to thin out the fat, then we have to use another machine. Basically, that's what it is. So when people tell you, oh, come in for a radio frequency, and they tell you exactly the frequency that it delivers, start thinking if you're really going to be using it for thinning the fat or tightening the skin. Because heating up the fibrocepta would do the lifting, will do the tightening. It will not thin out the fat so much. So sometimes we do employ mesotherapy so that we can thin the fat and lift the skin with a thermage or a radiofrequency. Okay? This is more on heating the skin, just so to show you that after 60 seconds, it's still hot. Other machines, after 30 seconds, the skin becomes cooled already. So this is just to compare the duration of the heat. Now the delivery system is that thermage actually works on the tip. So you have the electrodes there, and then you have the pulsed RF and vibration. Basically, these are just all reviews, the formation of your electromagnetic field via different ways, via electrical charges, via the pulsed RF, and vibration. This is a before photo of a patient. So we're looking at the jowl area. And actually, I don't know if it shows too well, but you can look at the entire face, the expression of the eyes. Because when we do the thermage, we don't do it just on the lower face. We also do it all over the face so that you can have an even lifting of the skin. And this is the after. So the before, the after. Okay, this is another slide that tells you what happens in that collagen. Okay, so denaturation of collagen, heating the septa, it's obviously your skin will contract. But what's interesting is that how it works over time. So you do get the effect right away, but you have remodeling over months so that you actually can get the benefit of the skin tightening, not just at the initial, because you do have immediate collagen contraction, but over months you can actually see the effect. Okay, and it goes all the way to the fascia. The fascia is right underneath your sub-Q. So it's deep heating. For advancing in age, it still works. Okay, and these are photos more for the lifting of the skin. Okay, and that's my last slide. That's just an application in the aesthetic field. Thank you.